Okay, hello everyone. I want to add my next campaign of Long War of the Chosen to YouTube. And on this first episode, I will just discuss about the changes that I made to the base game. I already completed a few campaigns on the highest difficulty, so for me playing again on base game, um, difficulty might be a bit too easy, or I don't think I will find enough challenge. As a result, I made a couple of changes in configuration, but I also give some buffs and I adjusted some skills. So this episode I will just go over this list basically. Um, I will try to keep this relatively short, so I won't go into details, maybe 30 minutes or so. Otherwise, I will end up spending debating for hours each particular aspect. On starting options, I don't think I have anything too spectacular or nothing that deviates from the standard too much. I have not created equally. This is, I think, in the base game already. Hidden potential is disabled by default, if I remember right. I do like to play with hidden potential and not created equally. This will give me soldiers with relatively, I wouldn't say big, but medium range of stats, both the starting stats and their progression. This can create some interesting situations for better and worse, and also maybe it will push me to adjust some of their skills based on their stats. I do prefer a lower grace band. This means less hits will be promoted to, less hits will be demoted to grace, but also less misses will be promoted to grace. So I'm not sure if it is a buff or a nerf. I think it goes both ways. I do prefer a bit more reliable or, yeah, let's say more accurate distribution of hit miss and less grace chance overall possibility. I do like to start with Templars. I'm also okay starting with Skirmishers. I think both classes are fine. Templars are a bit stronger earlier in the game, and also I think Templar HQ can mitigate some of the early wounds that you take. Skirmisher HQ can be better for, let's say, construction. If you have a lot of construction projects early in the game or digging early in the game, this can that could give you quite some benefit. But I do think Templar is stronger overall. So unless you have a very specific strategy, I would also recommend sticking with this one for now. I do not like Reapers at start. To be fair, I also think they're a bit weaker than the other two classes, as in the Templar and Skirmishers. So that's not really an option for me. I have a Red Fog disabled. I played Legend difficulty with integrated DLCs. I will play Iron Man, but I have some notes here. First, I will not have the Iron Man option enabled. I do need my saves. Saves could get corrupted, and sometimes they become unusable. So even if I would have the Iron Man option enabled, I would need to make some sort of backup system, which in my opinion just defeats the whole purpose. I also like to test things. If I encounter a bug, I just save the game, and maybe after the mission I will just reload and try to see or experiment a little bit. This is not possible if you play Iron Man, so all in all, I do need my saves for both testing purposes and to avoid bugs. But apart from the issues, there are also some cases where I would use them. So one would be the golden ticket system. This is something I implemented in the last campaign, and I think this is nice to have. What this means, I'm allowing myself 2 times in the campaign to restart a mission. It can be the same mission, or I can use them the same time on. This will give me some flexibility and maybe less. I wouldn't say stressful. I don't think I would describe the experience necessarily stressful, but it does give me more flexibility. And if I have like a bad activation that ends up into, I don't know, squad wipe, I don't have to close my 2 weeks campaign. I can just restart one mission once. It's a mistake. It can happen. I had this in my previous campaign. I never used it, so whether that will be the case or not, I will see. But I think it's nice to have. It also maybe allows me to be a bit more aggressive, or maybe if I have like a really crazy idea in a critical situation, I could go for it, and if it doesn't work out, at least I have a chance to try something different. So that's basically all there is with this golden tickets. I will also use reload in other cases. In case of bugs, I already mentioned, but I also have sometimes misclicks. This maybe happens like, maybe 3 or 4 times in the campaign. I will leave this in video so you can judge for yourself. My problem is I do play on a big TV OLED, and sometimes due to the pixel difference and so on, I don't click right on the place where the cover is. So instead of going to cover, I click one tile in the left or right or something like that. It's quite obvious when it happens, so it's not like like I don't know, I misclick shooting an enemy or something like that. So mostly this is for movement. If I want to move to a cover and I one tile less or something like that when I clicked, then I will just use the TTC to teleport or to move to the tile where I want it. Not a big deal, but this does happen, and yeah, it's whether that's unfair or not, that's up to you. It's just I prefer not losing the soldiers or maybe even the campaign because I misclick. That would be a bit unfair from my point of view. Now going to the actual challenges. So what changes do I do in the base game? Maybe I should start actually with the last point. I have about 54 mods. The mod list will be on Discord. Out of these mods, the vast majority are user interface, they are cosmetics, but there are some exceptions, and these are the 2 exceptions basically: the Commander's Choice and Ruler Reaction Revise. Commander's Choice allows me to select the class that a rookie is promoted into. This is valid basically for the first month or so in the campaign. Afterwards you get GTS and you can just select the class. But it does help me to select the soldiers I want. This is an advantage if I'm unlucky and I get like a lot of snipers. Otherwise I may have a bad start just because I roll bad. Especially since I play with not created equally and hidden potential, I could end up with like a sniper with 55 aim, and I could make them working, but I think it's just an unnecessary RNG that I don't really need. So that's one. And the ruler reaction revise, this is something that, to put it bluntly, I do not like the current system that Long War of the Chosen has for rulers. They have one action for every action that XCOM takes, and this basically pushes you into having a very, very specific strategy, as in stun, multi-shot, stun, multi-shot, stun, multi-shot. And you can achieve this. It's not that complicated. Well, you do have to prepare the part in advance, so to speak. But I dislike the flexibility. I need to have that particular squad available, and these rulers are not... they do appear in relatively rare. I didn't even get, I think, I only got 1 armor out of 3 in the previous campaign. So they are not that common. They appear in troop columns, and if you don't have the right party to go or to infiltrate, you will lose the opportunity. And you can't really go with a different squad because the rulers will just run you over. So I dislike a bit the whole idea of really needing a very, very specific squad to deal with them. So this is the mod that adjusts that. So how does it adjust? Basically, instead of one action for every XCOM action, it's a 33% chance. However, I gave them the immunity, so I cannot stun them. And by give them immunity, I mean I didn't actually find a mod that grants them this benefit. I will simply not use any stuns or frost grenade or anything that would disable them. The only, let's say, exception that could happen is technically the concussion rocket. Let's say if I use it and I catch the ruler and the ruler gets stunned, I'm not sure. Maybe I will just reload and try it again. This is a very specific scenario, which is probably not happening since I'm not using rockets. If the ruler is present, I'm probably focusing on gunning him down. But generally speaking, that's the TLDR. Rulers have less chance, or their reaction is reduced, but they also get immunity. This gives me a bit more flexibility. I don't need to have like hardcore stuns with me. If I have some soldiers that have multi-shot or can do some damage, I can still do the mission, and they can still be dangerous if they get like 2 or 3 consecutive actions. It can be quite devastating. So it's not risk-free, but I think this is a reasonable balance. All right, besides these changes, besides these mods, I did made a lot of config changes. This is inside the Long War of the Chosen. If you want the list, or if you want to know the exact values in the config files, this will be on Discord. I cannot put a link on YouTube because putting a link on YouTube requires me to send my private data to YouTube. I'm not exactly comfortable doing that, at least for now, but I will put the description on how you can find the threads where I have all this information. I have some reports, some impressions, and my list of mods, and also patches with the configuration. So if you want to copy and change, or you are curious to implement some of them in your own campaign, you can follow that one. Going to additional difficulty changes, the most impactful by far is this one, the first one. The force level dictates the difficulty of enemies, and on all difficulties is 1 force level every 15 days. I decreased that to every 10 days. So this is basically a 50% force level increase. In terms of impact, I will obviously fight a much stronger enemy much faster. For example, a sectopod will appear early August as opposed to mid-end October. So it's a noticeable difference, I would say. Next is the strength increase. The strength increases by 2 every 10 days. This is basically the standard UFO. I decrease it to every 8 days instead, so roughly a 20% strength increase, generally speaking. I heard some arguments that reducing this might even be considered a bit of a buff, because the way that the strength increases in the game is via UFO, so this means you have a bit more UFOs, like 20% more UFOs. This means you have a bit of a higher chance of catching them, which are very, very valuable missions. Now, I didn't want this to be like a side benefit, so I just decreased the chance of the UFO from 30% to 10%. So I would say a significant decrease of me even finding them. I did run my previous campaign with these settings, and I found exactly 0 UFOs the entire campaign, so it seems to be quite effective. I would prefer to have like 1 UFO. I think it would be nice, but let's see if this was maybe a bit too ambitious or not. The next difficulty, and maybe I should start with the middle point, I'm not allowed to purchase engineer and scientist from the black market. I think you can. The reason for this particular restriction is heavy snowball. If you can purchase scientists from the black market, you can snowball pretty hard. And by pretty hard, I mean you could get plasma by July and even June if you really push for it. Getting plasma in June, you pretty much won the game, I would say, even with this increased difficulty settings, because the enemies will roll like mid-rank troops, and you will be on the end game gear already. So I think the base game is, I'd say it's fairly balanced for someone who's not that experienced, but for someone who really knows the mechanics and how to, let's say, I wouldn't say exploit, but let's say benefit from all scenarios. I think you can just snowball too hard, and there's no realistic chance of losing. Or I don't think the game on highest difficulty is balanced around XCOM crack addicts. Let's put it this way. Alright, so I just want to disable my ability of purchasing engineers and scientists. This means that my increase on both base management and research will be more gradual, and I will not end up with like the 10th scientists in April or some, some absurd levels. However, this does pose a problem, and the problem is the first month. Because without one engineer, you cannot dig, and without one scientist, the first research is gonna take like 3 weeks. So you are very, very far behind if you cannot acquire one engineer and one scientist quickly. Now, one option is to just restart campaigns until I'm lucky and find one of each. This is, not the most interesting experiment, so I just gave myself one engineer and one scientist. And to compensate a little bit with this buff, I just reduced the starting supplies to 150 to 0, which in normal circumstances was anyway going to go towards the purchasing of scientists and a bit of leftover for the engineer. So this is a bit of a, let's say, benefit in the, I would say, the first 20 days, but it will decrease at the first supply drop because I'm not allowed to buy any scientists or engineers, and I will slowly fall behind unless I'm like really lucky with engineer and scientist discoveries. But this will give me this will allow me to use supplies on other purposes, so it's not like a critical point, but I do feel the difference. I'm probably getting plasma in like August as opposed to June, end of June, when I would normally get them if I could just rush scientists. I also buffed the enemy reaction. For those who do not know, if the enemy runs into XCOM on their turn, they get a chance of a reaction, either yellow or green, depending on which alert type they were. The green alert is generally a defensive, so Overwatch or maybe some buffs, but the yellow alert can be offensive, so this means extra shots. This means that if I do not scout properly, or I do not disable their yellow alert reaction, and by disable I mean you have to damage them, in that case the reaction is demoted from yellow to green, then I will be punished. Specifically, if a pod runs into my flank and I'm not able to, I'm not doing a proper scouting and they do run into my flank, even 2 soldiers shooting on my flank soldiers are likely to get a kill. So as long as I do have good tactics, this will not be a problem, but it's a bit more punishing if I don't. The next is Rebel Hiding Job Not Allowed. This is a bit both for challenge purposes, but I also, honestly also prefer to play in this way. What's the effect? Now, the generic strategy is once the strength reaches 5 or 6 in a region, you tend to hide the rebels, mostly because you don't want to deal with high strength retaliation, which can be very difficult, and they are. By not hiding them, I will have to fight a lot of high strength retaliations. And this may also give you a bit of information and insight. Maybe you want to take this approach, or maybe you want to know if it's even possible to deal with this high strength retaliations. So, fighting a strength 10, 11, 12 retaliation can be quite difficult, but having done this for 2 campaigns now, I could say this is relatively doable if you are prepared. And I think it will be a decent content, so to speak. And the last point, which is more like endgame oriented, I can only queue for chosen stronghold, as in to eliminate the chosen completely, only after I beaten that specific chosen on a chosen Avenger defense. What this means that this campaign, if I manage to reach to an endgame, I will have to fight at least 3 chosen Avenger defense. As a side note, I think this is a bit of a design flaw that you can actually avoid them completely, which is the correct tactic if you're talking about the efficiency point of view, as in you have to rush them and deal with the stronghold before you even have before they have the opportunity to do a chosen Avenger defense. I think this is a bit of a let's say questionable design decision. I think you should I think one of them should be mandatory. Fighting 3 of them, maybe it's a bit overkill, but one of them I think it should be mandatory in the same way as a base defense is mandatory. It's a challenging mission, and I think it should be part of the XCOM campaign. So I'm going to fight one of each chosen, so this you will have a reference in case you have to do the same. You can have that. You can check that how I defeated that particular chosen. Maybe it will help you, or it will give you some insight on that specific mission. And now we're going mostly to the buffs, I would say. First category is adjustment for the difficulty settings. Now, these difficulty settings have some side effects that I don't particularly like, or they do create some imbalances. And I'm trying here to adjust those imbalances to some extent. And by adjust, I mean I will give some buffs to compensate a bit for the negative effects. First one is I reduced the engineering requirements for all items that need more than 5 engineers. So the issue that I have in the previous main campaign, and it was probably the main reason why I basically gave up, is that since I cannot purchase engineers, I am at the mercy of RNG, how many I get. This means maybe my base development or my digging, let's say, will be a bit slower, which is fine. Maybe I cannot assign them to power, but that's okay. I can get extra supplies and I can upgrade the power relay instead. So I would say that's not the end of the world. However, endgame items do require a certain number of engineers. And I ended up in a situation where I had the research for fusion sword. It requires 7 engineers and I had 2. So it's not like it's very close. It was kind of a big gap and there was nothing I could do. And I knew that it will take at least 3 months of trying to look for engineers to even have a chance of building those items. So I decided that all items that require more than 5, which they're not that many, it's mostly some of the end game, will be reduced to 5. Now, even 5 engineers might be challenging. I mean, depends a bit on luck. But I do have engineering research that can compensate, so they will add a fictive 1 engineer, so to speak, for engineer requirement purposes. I don't mind doing one or two of those, but I don't want to spend like 2 months of researching just to reach the engineering requirements. That will basically kill my entire research. Um, the next point is about recruiting. Recruiting is the least used job in Long War of the Chosen, mostly because it's just not beneficial. It's easier to just use intel and then rescue some rebels, and those rebels that you get via jailbreak are, let's say, you acquire rebels faster that way than actually using the recruit job. So I was thinking what's the way to buff them, and there is actually in the game a chance to recruit one scientist and one engineer via recruiting. So instead of rebel, you get either a scientist or an engineer, but this is restricted only to liberated regions, and the chance is actually very, very low. I did some testing in one of my previous campaign. It takes about 2 months of recruiting to actually get one of them. To put it in perspective, if you use in the liberated regions all your rebels on supply, you're getting about 1,500 supplies in 2 months. Now paying 1,000, now if you have to choose between, do I go for 1,500 supply or one engineer or one scientist, I think the choice is quite simple, right? So this is extremely expensive. The chance is very low. I don't think anyone will actually use this as it's currently implemented. So I added the chance, this chance on normal region, not only in recruiting, and I buffed it for like 1%, less than 1%. This realistically means that you can get probably once every month and a half or something like that, one engineer if you have a full haven recruiting. It's not a lot. In my previous campaign, I had this option. I believe I got 2 recruit retaliations, and in total, I believe I got one engineer and one scientist. So not terrible, not the worst. It's a benefit. It's something that makes recruiting a bit more appealing. The other jobs are still better, but at least it does close the gap a little bit, especially since I cannot purchase engineer and scientist, so I might run into scarcity issues where this option might become a bit more interesting. Recruit retaliations are, especially high-level recruit retaliations, are among the highest missions, or the most difficult missions in the game. I played a couple of them in one of my previous campaigns. They are more difficult than a base defense. They're more difficult than an invasion. And I think that's just not balanced. I don't think anyone plays them, so that's why probably they this is not a particularly known fact. People don't use recruiting to begin with, let alone recruiting in high strength regions. So this is basically a singular problem, more or less, as far as I'm concerned. So I did try to nerf a bit the RNF schedule, so I don't get reinforcement like every 2 turns. They are still very difficult, but I wanted to make it like in a similar difficulty as Intel and Supply. I just don't feel it's like a very balanced if the least rewarding job has the most difficult penalty. It just doesn't make sense. Additional option is about the liberation of a region. Liberation early is always a benefit. So if you can liberate early, you should always do it. It has a massive snowball effect. Even liberating 2 months earlier, it's still gonna be 1,500-ish supply benefit, which on mid-game is a significant amount, right? So with this, I'm trying to mitigate a bit the side effect or the downside of liberating a bit later. I might get unlucky. I might get, especially due to the difficulty settings, I might get at the region I'm trying to do the lip 3 is getting heavily reinforced and it ends up like strength 7 or something like that. I have to wait a bit before I can actually complete the liberation chain. So I wanted to give up some benefits for late game liberation, and that benefit is I will cut a bit more strength. if I do liberation like in August plus or something like that, it's almost always in a very, very high strength region, and this at least will give me benefit of additional strength reduction. If I'm lucky and I get it early, then it's probably I'm not gonna take full advantage. But I think this is a relatively balanced way to deal with things. If I'm getting a bit unlucky with the liberation chain, at least I will have some benefits, so that's the main idea. The next 3 points are about soldier experience. In XCOM Long War, probably also in vanilla, the soldiers XP system is not exactly balanced, I would say. If you're killing like a super heavy mech, one of the most hardest difficult enemies to take, maybe outside of Sectopod, you're still getting the same experience as you get on a first trooper that you meet in the first mission. So there is no... the whole system is about the number of enemies you kill. It's not about the difficulty of the enemies, how strong they are, what level they are, and anything like that. Now this is, let's say, not so much of a problem in the base game, because you're gonna do the missions anyway, but in my case, the enemies will gain a lot of strength and force level very quickly, and based on my experience in my previous campaign, I ended up fighting like sectopods with sergeant level or sergeant ranks. So this creates a bit of an imbalance in terms of what type of enemies I fight in my own ranks. I cannot really rank up faster because no matter what enemies I kill a sectopod or a gatekeeper, I'm still getting the same amount of XP as killing a very basic enemy. So since there is no real scaling for the types of enemies, and I do need to increase a bit my ranks to be able to deal with a significant buff that the enemy have, I give myself a bit of extra XP. And how does that translate? For the last 3 ranks, I need 10% less skills. This is basically a 10% XP buff for the last 3 ranks. How much is that, or how does this equate? I need 6 kills less for Tech Sergeant, 7 kills less for Gunnery Sergeant, and 8 kills less for Master Sergeant. To give you some perspective, if you complete one mission that is very light with 6 soldiers, the amount of kills equivalent that you get for completing the mission for 1 soldier is 13. So that's basically half the mission less to reach Tech Sergeant and half the mission less to reach Gunnery Sergeant. So to put it even more simply, I will need 1 less mission on average to get from Staff Sergeant to Gunnery Sergeant. So instead of, I don't know, 11 missions, I will only need 10. It is a buff, not a major buff. I do need to increase a little bit of my experience, otherwise, based on my experience in my previous campaign, it's just gonna be too much of a difference between my soldiers and the enemies. Another point is about the Master Sergeant share experience. So once a soldier reaches Master Sergeant, they cannot grow any further, but they still, I'm not sure if use XP is the correct word. Let me rephrase. They do share 33% of the experience that they gain, but the rest of it, which means 67%, is lost. So basically it's wasted. So what this buff does, that instead of 33%, he will share 66% and only 33% is lost. This helps also with my, I don't know, let's call it internal OCD. I don't need to focus on getting the kills with I should still do it, but it's less a penalty that I get a kill with the Master Sergeant instead of the Gunnery Sergeant. Because in that way, the actual experience lost will be slightly less, or I will not feel guilty. I taken one mission a Master Sergeant instead of Gunnery Sergeant because I will lose too much experience. So I think this is a quality of life. I'm not even sure why this, honestly, it's in the game. Why does the Master Sergeant or a soldier that is max level still stealing experience, technically speaking, from the other soldiers? But anyways, that's a longer story. One more point is about the soldiers on the black market. So each time the force, I wouldn't say each time, the rank of each soldiers on the black market is determined by the force level. And now for Master Sergeant and for Gunnery Sergeant, those levels are 40 and 35. This is some impressive force levels. I don't think I've played this game for quite a while, and I also played some very long campaigns. I don't think I've seen anyone that reaches force level 40. You probably need to play like more than 2 years, realistically speaking. So this setting is basically not achievable in game. So I did reduce it to from 35 to 25 and from force level 40-30. Now, even force level 30 is actually an impressive number to reach. On a base game difficulty, you probably need to play about 1.5 years to actually reach this force level. But since I do have force level increased settings, I might be able to reach this level before final missions, basically. This means that I could pick some higher rank soldiers before the end of the mission. So if I do have big losses and I want to squeeze in an additional 1 or 2 soldiers at the end, or maybe I find like a soldiers very good stats and maybe will replace someone who's a bit weaker or didn't roll too well and on a Master Sergeant. So it will give me some leeway on a very, very late game. Going in some abilities, Warlock is, in my opinion, by far the strongest chosen on the late game. Chosens also increase their power with force level, and this is quite noticeable. In particular, when it comes to Warlock, he has this Mind Scorch ability, which cannot be blocked. I don't know any mechanism in the game to block it. He is the only chosen that basically cannot be countered, so to speak. On a hunter, you can use a suppression, you can use a smoke, you can mitigate the chance of him doing damage. On assassin, you can spread your soldiers, maybe not 100% the ability to mitigate wounds, but I've had plenty wounds versus hunter, or I have plenty fights versus hunter where I ended up without a single wound. Warlock, on the other hand, has an AoE ability that cannot be dodged and will inflict wounds regardless of what gear you have. If he hits rebels, he will one-shot rebels with this one. So this is a very powerful ability that doesn't really have a counter. I was thinking a little bit on how to adjust this, maybe decrease its power. I decided to just increase the cooldown. So him using it once and causing some wounds, or even some rebel skills, fine, but using it twice, that shouldn't be, that's not necessary, so to speak. Warlock is pretty good at delaying his death because of the extra Lancer spawn, the zombie spawn, the extra units, the champion, and so on. So he's, I would say, probably the most tanky, even not tanky himself, but he requires by far the most damage to eventually take him down. So if I do end up with a bit on extra turns for him, I don't want him to use this twice. although this may happen anyway. Let's see. This is okay. This is a trauma from one of my previous campaigns. I do increase the reaction fire of enemies. This is not a new buff as far as I'm concerned. I played with these settings in vanilla Long War. Um, However, this can have a very, very specific scenario when it comes to a pod of sectoids. And that specific scenario, if they run into you, they have a bit of higher chance of reaction, and they can get multiple mind controls. And at that point, I'm looking at squad wipe scenarios. To be specific, I had 3 soldiers being mind controlled as a reaction fire. I think that's a bit unbalanced. If I could remove the mind control capability from a reaction fire list, that would be my preference, but I can't. There is no option to distinguish between mind spin and mind control. So I just remove this ability, but only from their reaction fire list. So if 3 sectoids 1 run into me and I'm ignoring them, then on their turn they can still go and take and do mind control of 3 of my soldiers, but at least I'm aware of that possibility. But as a reaction, taking mind control of 3 soldiers, I'm basically dead in the water with no real chance to recover from that. The only counter that I could think of is to have mind shields on everyone, but equipping all soldiers in all missions that they go with mind shields, it's just not feasible. So I will just put this on. I will say this is unlikely that this is going to happen, but it was the main the main cause of an end campaign in Long War, and on my introspection, there was nothing I could do about it. So, I live, I learn, I adapt. The last 2 points. One is about the XCOM points. Chosen, as I said, get a bit more powerful, both their HP damage, but their reward is not very interesting. Like 5 XCOM points is relatively low. The cheapest perk on the XCOM row is 10, cost 10. So after even defeating a chosen, I cannot even get enough points for a single or for the cheapest perk. I think that's a bit underwhelming. I'm not sure if this was balanced from the base game where you have less soldiers, so it's a bit understandable that you don't have that many, let's say, benefits because you only have like 15 soldiers or so. But in Long War of the Chosen, you probably have a roster of 50 soldiers or so, and this is like this could be a bit more generous. Let's put it this way, especially given the difficulty of fighting them. I also like the diversity of picking some extra perks and maybe go for some interesting combos. So there's not only the actual power, but also the interesting gameplay that this unlocks. So I do like this change. And the last point is about the infiltration upgrade on GTS. There are 2 infiltration upgrades. One is for 6 and 7 soldiers, and one is for 8 and 9. The 8 and 9 soldiers costing 250, I think, is reasonable. That's something that you probably be using mostly in the late game when you're going for like big missions, Psygate, Forge, maybe some second or third HQ. But the 6-man infiltration is something that I need, or it's kind of needed a bit earlier in the campaign. On the base game difficulty is probably like July-August upgrade in my case, but with the increased strength and force level, a lot of the regions get pushed into strength 3 and 4, and running 5 men on a 13-15 mission, that's not exactly feasible, especially when the enemies are a bit more powerful to begin with. So I do want to pick 6 soldiers as a baseline, but the cost by the time that I need it is actually very high. It's still recommended to run 5-man mission where it's possible, simply because it's more resource effective, cost effective, experience effective. You finish the mission faster means a new mission is spawned faster, and so it's a cascading effect. Running mission with less soldier is a better strategy. But if I'm getting a bit unlucky and the strength piles up in the regions that I have, I do need to run 6 soldiers, less efficient, but at least I want to have the possibility to purchase this upgrade. So a bit of cost reduction. The other one, I think it's fine. It's later in the game, and by that time I should be able to afford it. Now, all these are actually effects of the additional difficulty changes. If I remove this, I don't think any of these are necessary, so to speak. This is mostly a side effect of some of the changes from here. This, on the other hand, is something I prefer, or there are a bit of balances on some perks and abilities which I think could use it. I will start with probably the most impactful. The utility items and ammo will have no mobility penalty. So utility items is like medikit, battle scanner, mine shield, shape charges, things like that. And the ammo type will be in the same category. So all the vests and all the grenades still have the mobility penalty. Now, why is this the change? Well, for 2 reasons. First, I don't really like to go with empty slots, and this will be the case for a lot of the soldiers. This is not so much a mobility buff, but this is rather I have an extra utility. Because in the vast majority of the cases, if I have to choose between I'm taking 1 mobility penalty and 1 utility item, I will pick the mobility. Mobility is simply too strong. So it is a bit of a pity that I'm locked so many utility items. I have a scanner and I'm still keeping them unused. Moreover, if I have to pay for them, because they do cost in some cases corpses, most of the ammo types require some special autopsy. They require a proving down project, and they also cost to manufacture. If I'm going in all that path, I don't want the side grade. If I have to choose between +1 damage and one mobility, it's actually more or less even, but one is given for free by default, and the other one I have to do research and spend quite a bit. So it is a buff, but I also think this should be part of the base game. At least the utility items. Maybe for the ammo I could accept some compromises. The vest and grenades, I think it's fair to have the penalty, because they do provide quite some, well, let's say significant benefits. The vest alone will double your HP, right? So it's not like you have some extra medikit on a soldier. Next, I'm going to the to armors. I gave them 1 HP. This is for 2 reasons. One, because of the not created equal in hidden potential, some soldiers will roll quite low, and this might help them not getting one shot in the mid game. So basically, or if they do get one shot, they have a slightly higher chance of the bleed out. Not a massive benefit. However, there's also the second reason, and that is the cost of these armors are actually too high, in my opinion, for what they give. The problem is you don't have any alternatives. Spider suit is also even more expensive than the Predator armor. Exosuit, it's actually giving less survivability than even the basic nano vest. It only gives 2 HP without critical damage mitigation. Now, Exosuit does give you an extra heavy weapon slot, which is the main reason why you get it. Still, for an armor, this is like a abysmal value. So I do think it's a bit unfair relative to the amount they cost. They give so little survivability. This is also the reason why most people, or it's a basic strategy to just ignore them and go for the highest weapon tech you can get. because at the end of the day, the extra armor will let you survive not even an extra hit, but rather a graze. Like a Viper hits for like average 9, I believe. This Predator gives you an extra 4 if you assume the armor is like 2 HP. So all in all, this gives you like half a shot of an enemy that is in a mid game. Basically, it's too weak, but there's no other choice. Even 1 HP, I think it's too low, but let's start with that. Next is about Assault Dedication ability, which allows you to run Overwatch, or let's say to not trigger the Overwatch, and it also gives you a mobility boost of 2. The run Overwatch comes in handy sometimes, but also if you have a specialist, it's not difficult to remove Overwatches from the enemies. But the mobility itself I think, is relatively small. 2 mobilities translate into 1.5 tiles, which is rounded down to 1 tile. So it just gives you 1 extra tile, which is rarely or almost never actually beneficial. So it becomes mostly a skill of being able to move without triggering Overwatch. Now with this buff, instead of 1 extra tile, it will give him 2 tiles. And 2 tiles is actually becoming a bit more relevant, or is helpful in a lot of cases. This is basically from trial and error. So I did buff him this ability a little bit. Impact Fields is a PCS that, first of all, is very rare. Second of all, it's very difficult to use. Mostly because when you activate this one, you get the damage reduction, but it does cost 1 action point to activate it. So the best use case would be something like, I don't know, an assault or a shinobi. You want to dive, maybe it's in a risky situation, you might take some damage. So you want to activate some damage mitigation, and then you dive, do some damage, and hope you survive the aftermath. The problem is it costs 1 AP, and Shinobi tends to need the dash distance. Assault either needs the dash distance, as in run, gun, and dive, or they want to move. They want to be able to reach the enemy blue move and shoot twice with close encounters. So neither of the classes realistically can afford 1 AP when it matters. Now, does it happen that maybe you have some enemy close by and you can use impact fields and then, I don't know, slash it with a second move? Yes, but it's actually very rare. I use it in 2 campaigns. In my opinion, in the base game, you should just sell it all the time. It's a good source of supplies. So I just try to make it a bit more attractive and reduce the cost to 0 AP. This means it will be fairly valuable on classes that tend to dive or tend to be in harm's way. So like a Templar or an Assault Shinobi. That being said, I had this option in my previous campaign. I did not find a single Impact PCS. Impact Field PCS. I do not know if this option even works. It should be based on the configuration, but my point is this is a fairly rare PCS to begin with. I will probably have it on 1 soldier, maybe 2 if I'm lucky. And I will see if... I don't think this is powerful. I think this is like the bare minimum. There are other PCSs like speed that are, in my opinion, more useful. Even conditioning is arguably better until you have like power armor and such, because it only reduces like 33%, which plus 4 HP or something like that will have more value. So all in all, I'm just trying to make this specific PCS a bit more usable. I did find the last 2 officer ranks, the Infiltrator and I don't remember the name, the one that gives you +1 damage within the officer range, to take a bit less. 12 days is a lot of time, especially since you're going to use 1 officer or a very high ranking soldier will be away for 12 days. This is effectively 2 missions that you won't be able to participate. So I think reducing it a little bit to 8 days, which is the same as the previous 2 skills, is a bit more fair. Next point is about the sparks. I've tried spark in my previous campaign. I tried spark in my second campaign. I was a bit disappointed, honestly. I skipped them entirely in my third campaign, and on this campaign I want to make them. I want to play a little bit with them, mostly to get some experience. I never reach with a Master Sergeant rank or whatever the equivalent is called with a spark. I want to experiment what all that this game has to offer, but in my opinion, they're just too expensive. So this is my attempt. I cut the cost of manufacturing them to half. Well, it's not exactly half. It's half supply, Elerium, and alloys. It still costs 1 core, and it still costs, I believe it's 1 mech rec, if I remember correctly. So let's round up and say this is roughly half. I will restrict myself of using, let's say, maximum 2 of them, so I don't, like circumvent this cost reduction and run teams of full sparks or anything like that. The purpose is I want to experiment a little bit. I want to see what they can do, and I cannot really justify the cost. I think they're too expensive. This way, I can gear up 3 soldier with the cost of spark. Spark might be more powerful, but it's not 3 times more powerful. So, and resources, especially by the time in the timeline where I would train a sparks, are far too critical. And the next point is basically their mobility. They start with 12 mobility, which is, to put it politely, a brick. Their armor, in some cases, it does increase the mobility. You have 3 armor options, but the heavy armor option does not increase mobility at all. In that situation, you might just rename your spark to turret, I guess. Give it squad side, hopefully, and jokes aside, I did spend a lot of time in my first and second campaign just dashing with a spark. I think I spent more time dashing than shooting, simply because they were just too slow. They cannot keep up with most of my squad. In my second campaign, I picked the fast armor option, which is 2 mobility, and I spec'd him on melee, not because I like melee, but it was the only option that was usable because I could just dash in enemies, so at least I have a good chance of keeping up with the squad. I think they're just too slow, so I buffed the mobility +2. I think this should be the base one. I'm not even sure how people play with. Maybe it's just wrong tactics. I don't know. Let's move on. One other point, I did reduce the range of stats, of some stats, for not created weak equally. Basically for will, dodge, psi, and hacking. In other words, for stats that are not that impactful, I don't want to have, let's say, big ranges. I'm fine if, I don't know, let's say mobility is on an extreme, or aim is on an extreme, because high aim, I can put him on a shooter climbs. Low aim, I can probably make him like a flame technical or an assault. Well, most likely I'll have better stats in other areas. So I think aim and mobility are the critical ones. HP, I will say, is a middle importance. But the other ones are just not that critical. So that said, I could have end up in a situation where I have no mobility, no aim, and the soldier will have like high will and high dodge. And that's basically like, I wouldn't say useless, but a fairly weak soldier all around. So I'm just trying to mitigate the extremes on the stats that are not so relevant. I kept the extremes on the stats that I think they are somewhat relevant. And one of the last points for the buffs is the soldier respec. Due to hidden potential and not created equally, some soldiers on the high rank end up with weird stats, let's put it this way. I had the Master Sergeant in my previous campaign, a Flame Technical with 3 HP. Now, for a class that tends to be quite close to enemy, having 3 HP at Master Sergeant can be quite dangerous. So I wanted to respec, technical can be respec to Rocketeer. I put him in the back and they just launch rockets. Not so big of a risk. Still a problem if he gets flanked, but it's mitigate the chance of him dying into one shot. However, the respec is very expensive, and this is the cost increases per rank. So I don't want to wait like 30 days or 40 days or whatever it costs to retrain a soldier because I just rolled badly, or the soldiers just rolled very poorly. This doesn't happen very often. Maybe 1 or 2 soldiers will get this treatment, but when it does happen, I want to have some flexibility, and this is basically that flexibility. I restrict myself to maximum 3 respecs per campaign, but I reduced the respec from 5 days per rank to 1 day per rank. Sitting, I don't know, 1 week on the bench or whatever it takes, I think it's fine. You skip 1 mission, but you respec. Sitting 40 days on the bench, it's extreme, basically. This will also allow me, if I get lucky and I don't get any bad apples, maybe to test a little bit. Maybe I want to try, I don't know, a stun assault on late game or something like that, and maybe I will respec one of them, for testing purposes. I'm not sure if I will have the flexibility to do that, depending on how well my actual soldiers roll, but this is a nice option to have. And last, I have a few XCOM nerfs. The list is very short. It's mostly about the Flame Technical. I think Flame Technical is too powerful, honestly. So I did reduce the burn chance of the flame from 60% to 50%, and the raw stability burn chance from 50 to 40. Not a massive nerf. I still think he remains the best ambusher in the game. Panic chance alone is something that I could not. I wanted to nerf that as well, but I did not find it in the config, so I'm not sure where it is. I will see. I played with this on a previous campaign. It felt a bit better. By felt a bit better, I mean not that reliable, and this is, my opinion, a bit more balanced. He's still very powerful, and as far as early game goes, Flame Technicals are among the strongest class. As the game progresses, I think they lose a bit, in my opinion, they lose a bit of their value, and Rocketeers do become more powerful, but from what I've seen on Discord, this is my kind of singular opinion. People still swear or remain or they still remain with the preference of Flame Technicals. So without further ado, this is the end, and let's go to the campaign.